NATO countries are Russia's next target: sabotage, cyber threats, and violations of airspace. The aggressor is ramping up hybrid attacks on Europe. Alliance leadership fears that any concessions to Putin during the negotiation and signing of a peace plan will be seen by him as a sign of weakness. This means European countries need to intensify their defense preparations and significantly increase investments in security. Peace is only possible where Russia does not dare to start a new war. During his visit to Berlin, the NATO Secretary General for the first time presented a vision of how the alliance should act in the face of not just hypothetical, but very real threats. This was probably one of his most emotional speeches. So, the first point Mark Rutte emphasized: Putin is not acting alone. Without China's support, he would not be able to continue his bloody war against Ukraine. Second, the appetite of the Kremlin dictator will not be satisfied with just Ukraine, and to withdraw support from Kyiv now means letting the Russian army into your own home. And finally, third, you cannot trust the assurances of Kremlin officials that they do not intend to fight NATO. In the same way, at the beginning of 2022, they claimed they had no intention of launching a full-scale aggression against Ukraine.
We are Russia's next target, and we are already in danger. When I became NATO Secretary General last year, I warned what is happening in Ukraine could also happen to allied countries, and that we need to shift to a wartime mindset. I'm afraid that too many people are silently doing nothing. Too many don't feel the danger, and too many believe that time is on our side. That's not true. The time to act has come.
German Chancellor Friedrich Merz also voiced a principled position on what the outcome of negotiations to end Russia's war against Ukraine should look like. Nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, and no concessions at the expense of the interests and security of the EU and NATO. The head of the German government emphasized, during times of geopolitical upheaval, it is the North Atlantic Alliance that must play a key role. Right now, it is especially important to strengthen the European component of collective security, enhance coordination in the defense sector, and ensure long-term support for Kiev.
We firmly stand on the side of Ukraine to achieve our common goals. To advance this work, we will continue to increase pressure on Moscow. And finally, we will also take tougher measures against the Shadow Fleet. At the same time, we will continue to provide large-scale support to Ukraine. Above all, we want to use frozen Russian assets in Europe so that Ukraine can effectively defend itself against future Russian attacks.
European politicians realize that Russia, having gained enormous experience in the war against Ukraine, has no intention of stopping. In its 2026 budget, the aggressor country has allocated a record 13 trillion rubles for military needs. This amounts to 38% of all federal spending. And as the well-known British commentator Max Hastings writes, against this backdrop, the question of how stable the architecture of Western security really is and whether key partners can be fully relied upon becomes even more pressing. After all, Washington's policy toward its NATO allies is becoming increasingly unpredictable.
Almost no reasonable European now believes that if Russia were to launch new aggressive actions, for example against the Baltic states, the Trump administration would fulfill its NATO obligations and send military aid. Most Europeans, as well as many American analysts, expect that in the end, Washington will be forced to admit that its current foreign policy is based on fantasies. At the same time, it is obvious that Putin will not adhere to any agreements with America that do not align with his own interests. Max Hastings, columnist, in a column for Bloomberg.
Russia began its hybrid war on European territory a long time ago. Germany's military counterintelligence service has reported a sharp increase in the activity of foreign intelligence agencies within the country. The new report states that attempts by foreign intelligence services to obtain information about the size of the Bundeswehr, its armaments, command structure, and troop deployment plans have noticeably increased. At the same time, the number of cyber attacks and acts of sabotage on logistical routes has doubled. Moscow is one of the main sources of threats. That is why, according to the Wall Street Journal, Germany is developing a secret plan in case of war with Russia. Among other things, it provides for the immediate deployment of up to 800,000 NATO troops to the front line.
German officials admit that Russia could be ready to attack NATO as early as 2029. However, a series of espionage incidents, acts of sabotage, and violations of European airspace, which Western intelligence links to Moscow, suggest that aggression could come sooner. From the Wall Street Journal publication.
By the way, Denmark's counterintelligence also published a very similar report. The document states that the country is facing the highest level of external threats in many years. The states that pose a serious danger and undermine the stability of all of Europe are Russia and China. The report identified the appearance of unidentified drones near strategic sites as the most dangerous hybrid operation. Because of this, the airports in Copenhagen and Aalborg had to temporarily suspend operations. In 2025 alone, unidentified drones violated the airspace of at least 9 European countries: Finland, Norway, Denmark, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, Romania, and Moldova. And the record holder here is Germany. There, more than 1,000 incidents involving unidentified UAVs were recorded.
Europe is finally waking up because of the intrusion of Russian drones. European leaders are increasingly realizing that the threat is real and needs to be systematically contained. The economic dilemma is obvious. Shooting down a cheap drone with a missile that costs millions is inefficient, so governments and private companies are looking for affordable solutions: cheap interceptors, lasers, electronic jamming devices, interceptor drones, and other technologies. If European countries don't speed up production and coordination, the threat of even larger-scale attacks will increase. From a publication by The Telegraph.
Against the backdrop of growing Kremlin aggression, almost all alliance countries are accelerating the modernization of their armed forces and increasing defense spending. For example, next year, Latvia will allocate 200 million euros to strengthen its air defense and another 50 million to develop unmanned systems. Finland has purchased hundreds of systems for detecting and suppressing drones, while Poland has announced the launch of the largest military reservist training program in its history.
The war has allowed Putin to pass laws for 3 expansions of his army since 2022. He aims to create the second largest army in the world after China, with a regular force of 1.5 million troops, increasing its total size to 2,380,000, including reservists. Europe is only now beginning to realize its own defense sector shortfall, spurred by the perceived threat at its border and the White House administration's reluctance to keep footing the bill. From a publication by The Independent.
Of course, European capitals very much want peace and an end to Russia's war against Ukraine, but at the same time, they fully understand that making concessions to Putin is an invitation to a new war. He uses any pause or respite to regroup, build up his army, and prepare for the next strike, this time even against NATO countries. Sabotage, cyber attacks, and border provocations might just be a warm-up. That is exactly why European countries must act as a united front and increase their support for Ukraine so as not to give the aggressor a chance to escalate.
Subscribe to The Gaze and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.